Okay, so we are going to do your 2-section notes, equivalent fractions and decimals. So you can go back and forth between fractions and decimals. When you are going to take a fraction and write it as a decimal, you are going to divide. Okay, so when you divide, you always divide the top divided by the bottom. So for example, I'm going to do 3 divided by 4. And maybe one little note for us over here would be top divided by bottom. Okay. So most of the time when you do this, you will notice that 4 does not go into 3 nicely. So we have to put a 0 here. When we add more digits, we have to add a decimal point. And you have to add that decimal point right above there too. So now we can ask ourselves, does 4 fit into 30 nicely? And it does fit into nicely perfectly 8 times. Oh, sorry, 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. And when you subtract, you get a 2. Now we're not done yet. You have to keep going. So you add another 0. Does 4 go into 20? And it does perfectly 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. When you subtract, you get 0. So 3/4 as a decimal is 0.75. Okay. So now we'll do our next one. 6/5. So 6 divided by 5. Now, because this was an improper fraction, it was top heavy, the 5 does fit into 6 nicely. It fits in there 1 time. 1 times 5 is 5. When I subtract, I get a 1. Now, I have to keep going, so I need to add a decimal point. And I add a 0 and bring the 0 down. Does 5 go into 10? It does perfectly twice. 2 times 5 is 10, and I put a 0 there. So 6/5 equals 1.2 as a decimal. Our last one here, again, top divided by bottom, so 1 divided by 3. 3 does not fit into 1 perfectly, so I put a 0 there. I have to add a decimal point and a 0. Does 3 fit into 10? It does, 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. When I subtract, I get a 1. Bring down your 0. Does 3 fit into 10? It does, 3 times. Now you guys should notice that something's happening here, and this is going to keep happening. And so what this one is a repeating decimal. That 3 keeps repeating. So this one, we would write it 0.3 with a line over the top of the 3. And that's your answer. Okay, so that's the first part. You guys have any questions on those? Okay, so now it says using mental math to write fractions as decimals. So the one thing that you guys will get better at the more that we do this is recognizing certain things that allows you to go back and forth from fractions and decimals easier. So now I'm going to guarantee that some of you know that 3/4 as a decimal or 3/4 as a fraction looks like 0.75 as a decimal. You didn't even need to do this math. Okay, and I know that by the end of middle school, you're going to know that 1/3 is that 0.3 repeating decimal. Okay, it's just some of these things that you're just going to catch on to. So there is one neat thing, and because we know that I'm just going to show you real quick here. Maybe you guys should write this over to the side on your paper. 0 point. I'm going to remind you guys what these decimal places are over here. So this first one is the tenths. The second one is the hundredths. Then we have the thousandths and the 10,000ths. So the really cool thing is that if you can get your fraction to have a denominator of a 10, 100, or 1,000, you can change what it looks like as a fraction and then switch it to a decimal. And I'm going to show you what that means. So for example, when I peek at this, I go, okay, if I multiply 2/5 times 2, this gives me 4/10. It's an equivalent fraction, just like we did in section 2.9. So because it's 4/10, I know that as a decimal, the 4 is going to go in the tenths place, and that's my answer. Okay, so I didn't technically have to divide. Now, if I did divide 2 divided by 5, it would give me 4/10 as an answer. But here we are working with our mental math. We're trying to do mental math to find these. So let's do another one. When I look at 25, I know that if I multiply it by 4, I can get to 100. So if I multiply both the top and the bottom by a 4, 7 times 4 is 28. 25 times 4 is 100. So I have 28 hundredths, so I write it like this. That 8 is in the hundredths place. And that's your answer. Now this one might be a little tricky because we have 4. Now I know that you guys can't get 4 to 10, but can we get 4 to 100? Sure, you can multiply 4 by 25, kind of like we just did in the top one. So if you multiply 3 by 25, you're going to get 75 hundredths. So again, you put it in the hundredths place. And that ties back to that one we did right above it too. So sometimes there's more than one way to get there. Any questions on the mental math ones? Now, if I gave you one, like, let's say I gave you 5/6. Now, I can't think of anything that really quickly would get me to tenths or hundredths by multiplication times 6. So this one you would not try to use mental math. You would just divide. Okay? Okay. The next type of problem is you are going to take decimals and you're going to write them as fractions. You have to make sure that you simplify these. Okay? So when I do this, I am going to figure out what place the last digit's in. So this is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths. You can reference this up here. So then you're going to write it, the number. So it's 36 over 1,000. Simplify means I need to reduce it. I know that they can both be divided by, you want to divide them both by a 2 to start maybe? That's what a lot of times if we have even numbers, we can divide them both by a 2. 36 divided by 2 would give us 18, and 1,000 by 2 would give us 500. Now some of you guys are saying that they're even, so we can divide them both by a 2 again. 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 500 divided by 2 is 250. Well, the only factors of 9 are basically 3 and 9, and 3 and 9 cannot go into 250, and so that's your final answer. Okay, the next one. If you have a whole number, it just stays whole. Then we have tenths, hundredths. So I have 28 over, then you're going to put it over 100. Now I have to reduce this. I know that they both, like, let's just take a bigger number. I know they both be divided by a 4. 28 divided by 4 is 7. So the whole number stays. And 100 divided by 4 is 25. 7 25ths cannot be simplified. So that's your answer. Last one here. It's a negative, and that's okay. That means your answer is going to stay negative. Tenths, hundredths. So we put 8 over 100. Now I know that they can both be divided by a 2. Okay. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 100 divided by 2 is 50. Both can be divided by 2 again. That would give me 2 25ths. And that's as far as you can take it. Make sure you don't forget about our negative here. And with fractions, that negative can go with the top or the bottom or right out in front. I just was kind of scrunched for room. So that's your final answer. Okay. Okay, so I know in your copy here, it has this book assignment. Don't worry about it. You're not going to do that book assignment. You are going to do the following worksheet.